Why do future teachers need to know the learner-centered psychological principles? Let's find out. The learner-centered psychological principles pertain to all learners and the learning process. It is best understood as an organized set of principles where no principle should be viewed in isolation. These principles are taken from the principles developed by the American Psychological Association. These LCP principles are actually divided according to four factors. Let's proceed to the first factor. The first factor are the cognitive and metacognitive factors. The first principle tells us about the nature of the learning process. The learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. Successful learners are usually active, goal-directed, self-regulating, and they are responsible for their own learning. To construct useful representations of knowledge and to acquire the thinking and learning strategies necessary for continued learning success across the lifespan, students must generate and pursue personally relevant goals. The second principle tells us about the goals of the learning process. A successful learner, over time and with support and instructional guidance, can create meaningful, coherent representations of knowledge. This strategic nature of learning actually requires for students to be goal-directed. The third principle is about the construction of knowledge. The successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. Knowledge widens and deepens as students continue to build links between new information and experiences and their existing knowledge base. The nature of these links can take a variety of forms, such as adding to, modifying, or reorganizing existing knowledge or skills. How these links are made or developed may vary in different subject areas and among students with varying talents, interests, and abilities. The fourth principle tells us that successful learners use strategic thinking in their approach to learning, reasoning, problem solving, and concept learning. The successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. The fifth principle tells us about thinking. Higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations facilitate creative and critical thinking. In addition, successful learners know what to do if a problem occurs or if they are not making sufficient or timely progress towards a goal. Successful learners can reflect on how they think and learn. They set reasonable learning or performance goals. They also select potentially appropriate learning strategies or methods, and they monitor their progress towards these goals. The last principle related to cognitive and metacognitive factors is about the context of learning. Learning does not occur in a vacuum. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, including culture, technology, and instructional practices. Teachers play a major interactive role with both the learner and the learning environment. Also, the cultural or group influences on students can impact many educationally relevant variables such as motivation, orientation toward learning, and ways of thinking. Technologies and instructional practices must also be appropriate for the learner's level of prior knowledge, cognitive abilities, and their learning and thinking strategies. The next factor that we have are the motivational and affective factors. The seventh principle tells us that motivational and emotional influences has an effect on learning. What and how much is learned is actually influenced by your motivation. Motivation to learn, in turn, is influenced by the individual's emotional states, beliefs, interests and goals, and habits of thinking. Intrinsic motivation also affects our learning. It is stimulated by tasks of optimal novelty and difficulty relevant to personal interests and providing for personal choice and control. Curiosity, flexible and insightful thinking, and creativity are major indicators of the learner's intrinsic motivation to learn. The last principle related to motivational and affective factors tells us that effects of motivation on effort are highly regarded. Acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. Effort is another major indicator of motivation to learn. Without learners' motivation to learn, the willingness to exert this effort is unlikely without coercion. The 10th, learner-centered psychological principle belongs under the developmental and social factors. As individuals develop, there are different opportunities and constraints for learning. Individuals learn best when material is appropriate to their developmental level and is presented in an enjoyable and interesting way. Learning is most effective when differential development within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is considered. The 11th principle highlights the social influences on learning. Learning is actually influenced by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communications with others. Learning can be enhanced when the learner has an opportunity to interact and to collaborate with others on instructional tasks. Learning settings that allow for social interactions and that respect diversity encourage flexible thinking and social competence. Quality personal relationships that provide stability, trust, and caring can increase learners' sense of belonging, self-respect, and self-acceptance, and provide a positive climate for learning. Now, the last three factors or principles belong under the individual differences. Individual differences will actually have an effect on learning. Learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities for learning that are a function of prior experience and heredity. The interaction between learner differences and curricular and environmental condition is another key factor affecting learning outcomes. Individuals are born with and develop their own capabilities and talents, and in addition to learning and social acculturation, they have acquired their own preferences for how they like to learn and the pace at which they learn. Learning is most effective when differences in learners' linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are considered. However, language, ethnicity, race, beliefs, and socioeconomic status all can influence learning. Careful attention to these factors in the instructional setting enhances the possibilities for designing and implementing appropriate learning environments. The same basic principles of learning, motivation, and effective instruction should be applied to all learners. Now, our last principle highlights standards and assessment. Setting appropriately high and challenging standards and assessing the learner as well as learning progress, including diagnostic, process, and outcome assessment, are integral parts of the learning process. Effective learning takes place when learners feel challenged to work towards appropriately high goals. Take note that assessment provides information to both the learner and teacher at all stages of the learning process. In summary, there are different principles categorized according to various factors. These should be used as a guide to facilitate learner-centered learning for students of all levels.